Middlecoff, what is the surest way to find out if there's a quarterback competition?
Interview the general manager, then interview the head coach in a 24-hour period and get two different takes.
That's the surest way to be confused, I think. Not just on QB's availability, but who the QB is going to be. I think, and you've always said this, watch what they do, not what they say. Coaches will tell you with their actions. And in a quarterback competition, the fastest way to figure out what a coach thinks is to count the reps. We can't count reps yet, but Kyle Shanahan told us today what the reps are going to be. Sam Darnold, Trey Lance are going to split them. Sounds like a competition to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think he announced what anyone with a brain saw coming from a mile away. Like, Trey Lance was not getting just inserted at the number one spot and put on scholarship like he did last year. Now, that doesn't mean when they open up a practice where people are able to see he's not the first quarterback out there. But I thought today, of all the quotes I've seen throughout the NFL, when it comes to specific players, this to me, again, we follow this team closer, but feels like one of the more eye-opening ones that he said it. You know, like you said, if the reps come and Trey's getting 100% and he's getting 0, then that's all that matters. Like, the actions matter, not the words. But he knows what, once this comes out of his mouth, what is the way it's going to be perceived. And he admitted as much. Like, these guys are splitting first-team reps. That's not what we did last year. That's what we're going to do this year. And he did, I mean, I don't see how anyone is shocked by these comments. I honestly am perplexed by anyone that is, really.
Do you think people are?
That follows this team. I mean, it's hard to tell with the internet. I mean, there are some people that... I think in the sense that... Because I have seen a lot of legitimate questions like, how could you invest this much in a quarterback and not do everything to figure it out?
Yeah.
And I think for the most part, that's always been the way business is done in pro sports in general. In basketball and football. In baseball, it doesn't matter as much, right, because of the minors. But in basketball and football, I think now, when you're really competitive, the amount of money that you're playing veteran players on your team, and the Warriors are a pretty good example with Wiseman, these teams pivot faster than they ever have. There's just too much money on the line. There's too much going. I think there's a guy right ahead of Trey. Different. It's not, his situation is not apples to apples, but they have legitimately pivoted off of him. Part of it is like, well, Aaron Rodgers. If it wasn't Aaron Rodgers, it would be someone else. It would be Lamar Jackson. It would be, they're done with the guy. And I just think that's pretty new. Like, Al Davis was ahead of his time. Like, Jamarcus Russell basically got 3 years, and it was like a disaster. And he was the number 1 overall pick. I think that just happens much more now where teams just... You've seen it like when they pay big money for Jared Goff and Carson Wentz, guys that were drafted 1 and 2, right? Within a couple years of the huge contract, they're like, we're done.
Right.
I just think teams are willing, and it might be because the salary cap's bigger. I think the pressure, the amount of money that's on, especially when you have a good team, the Eagles and the Rams are pretty good examples, right? They're competitive teams. I think this Niner team is pretty unique. Probably be a little different if they were the Texans or the Bears. I think you would ride it out, right? You'd give them another year for sure. So if you're in the mix, the playoff mix, I just think you pivot at rapid speeds now in basketball and football.
Yeah, I mean, the Trey thing is unique, right? Because it'd be different. Like Trey hasn't played any games, and they got another quarterback who played better than him, and that guy just took his job. If Trey had played all season and was average, what would they do? It's not the same situation, right?
Yeah.
But they're not going to argue with what, I'll sound like a college football coach here. What God has put in front of them, John, is that God gave him another quarterback, so they took that quarterback. What did Shanahan say today? Draft is how you enter the league. But that's all it is. That's all it is. Which, you're right. That's what people say. That's not usually how teams act.
3 years, I think, is like the new 4. Don't you? 4 used to be a long gap between where you were drafted and where you were in, and it was enough time. Like, Belichick,
you'd be treated like a first rounder for 3 years.
Yeah, you'd get extra opportunities. With the former players, our buddy Jeff Schwartz, guys that were drafted later or undrafted free agents, they always say it's unfair because it is. And it's just basic, like, I've given him more money. And I think forever it was like once you were going to that fourth year, it's like we'd already moved or we've drafted new players or signed other players. I think that date is now 3, heading into year 3. Like if we got problems, and problems can be all sorts of things, whether it's injury, poor play, unknown. We just start moving and shaking.
He said we'll play the best guy. Aside from Brock. Brock's not in a competition. Brock just has to get healthy. But he said we'll play the best guy. Now, as we know, you can split reps and still nudge it towards somebody's favor, right? You could still do that. He could nudge it to Darnold's favor. He could all ties go to Trey. Like he could still do it that way.
They did that last year, right? It was just Trey could do whatever. It didn't matter. He could have a
Yeah, that wasn't a nudge. That was like a full on.
Yeah, he was 5 and 20, but we're good.
Through higher risk throws. Yeah, Jimmy was. But part of that was they had already decided, and I think we'd agreed with them, you're not going to get all the way to the mountaintop with Jimmy Garoppolo. So maybe you take a half step back now with a developmental player to take 2 steps forward. And I think that's where the thing with Darnold comes into play is there's this debate about, well, is Darnold terrible or is he as good a skill set as there is in the league, which is what Kyle Shanahan said, which is not true. That's not true. I don't believe that to be true.
Kyle doesn't believe that.
Okay. So there are some things that Kyle says that may not be completely true.
But that's coach speak, right?
Yeah, that's coach speak. But I still think the reason they got to Trey is because Kyle recognized that, the best quarterbacks in the NFL are on some of these best teams. You got to beat Joe Burrow. Maybe that wasn't at the time, but the Mahomes, you got to beat Josh Allen. Like you have to win. The goal here is to win the Super Bowl. You're going to have to beat an excellent quarterback in the Super Bowl. And so if Sam Darnold can't be an excellent quarterback, if Brock Purdy can't be an excellent quarterback, then I think the Niners are right to leave the door open on Trey Lance, to allow Trey Lance to surprise us, shock us, take the job back, whatever. Because at the end, there is a part of him physically that is different than these other 2 guys. Now, what was interesting is Javon Hargrave was on NFL Network today, and they interviewed him, and they asked him, what do you think of Purdy? And I thought he was going to give like a non-answer. And he said, well, I remember when we were watching tape for the NFC Championship game, I didn't know anything about him. And when we watched him, the number one thing that stood out was he's hard to tackle. He was really good at escaping the pocket. Like that was his biggest takeaway. He's hard to tackle. He's good at escaping the pocket. So, that was an area where you'd always kind of given Trey the nod over Brock. But we've seen Brock in games now run away from people a lot. I've seen Sam do some of that. But I don't know if it's because Sam took too long to throw the football or if because he, was just a playmaker in that way. I know if you go back and watch the Panthers-Falcons game from last year, he did a lot of it. But I think it'd be a little crazy not to at least be open-minded to the possibility that Trey Lance gets better. Because the reason that he drafted him still exists for them. Like you still have to beat some excellent individual talented quarterbacks in order to win the Super Bowl.
But they don't feel close-minded to me when I hear them talk.
No, I agree with you. I'm not saying he is close-minded. I am saying I think ties should go to Trey Lance, though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not under that. I would disagree there. I think you factor in – I think what makes this 49er situation unique, a lot of times when these decisions happen, it's like coach, GM, owner, right? Especially if the owner's, involved, meddler or whatever. I think with this 49er situation, you remember it wasn't a quarterback situation, but like the Patriots were a good example. A lot of decisions happened where the locker room was like, what the fuck? The Super Bowl is one of the most legendary things where they just benched Malcolm Butler. And even after like Brady and everyone, like this is insane. What are we doing? I do think Kyle has a very, very good, for being like this old school kind of hard ass, he's very good, the pulse of his locker room. And that's what made last year's training camp, the elephant in the room, was fucking weird. And you kind of felt it while it was going on because they were simmering, Silver, old school Big J. There were some things out there. But as it went on, then their actions told you everything to know when they re-signed Jimmy. And I think a lot had to do with the heartbeat of the group. And when we're talking about like the 10 Pro Bowl type guys, Kyle talks to them and he knows because they understand what it looks like. So I think their influence on this, because the one thing you get, right, when you play against the 49ers in practice, Nick doesn't take as many reps, but he watches. Fred, Greenlaw, right? Hufanga now is playing a big role. Armstead definitely likes to practice when he's healthy. He's a guy that doesn't definitely miss reps.
Yeah.
Mooney out there.
I would guess Hargrave will be out there practicing. At
Yeah,
least
so
initially.
you pay a guy that much money, and now he knows what it looks like from the Steelers and Eagles. That there are going to be a lot of variables to this, unless it's just one guy's incomplete every other pass and the other guy's crushing it, right? But I think that's where it's not. Historically, the NFL, it's like, coach makes this is a tough decision, but I had to make it.
Yeah.
I think the 49ers, for having Kyle is the grand poobah, he's the decision maker. I do think it's kind of a group decision with the boys, and that's Kittle, Trent, Juszczyk, McCaffrey, Debo Ayuk, and I do think the 3 or 4 key defensive guys, because they're truly seeing it, right? I think Fred is like a pseudo executive in this whole operation because his view is pretty unique of it, right? Just he kind of gets to see it,
right?
A lot like Jimmy.
It's him against the quarterback. I think that's how he looks at it, right? I think when we watch Fred practice, Fred Warner practices like it's him against the quarterback.
Because the one thing, and we'll get into Purdy here in a second, is there is just an unknown. We have no clue as of today, or even probably once they really start practice after the draft, what a situation is going to be. And they might not really have a gauge till July. So I'd say OTAs is pretty important, right? I mean, very important definitely for Trey Lance. Because, I think he's John Baxter, former Fresno State, USC, and Michigan special teams coach.
And Fresno State again. And current Fresno State special teams coach, actually.
You used to have a saying, when you find yourself in a hole, the only way to get out is kind of drop the shovel. And there is no way around it. It's weird how we got here. It's not necessarily self-inflicted because he didn't mean to get hurt. He just didn't get the reps because he had to redshirt a year in the NFL. But he has found himself in a hole in the sense that he's no longer the starter after given the opportunity. And now has real competition with a guy, and you can bring up his stats for his career. But the reason the 49ers did not sign him for his stats for his career, it's the last 6 games in 2022 when the Panthers felt like they kind of had their shit together. And Sam Darnold had the best stretch of his career. Right? To me, just based on his career, I don't know if the 49ers would have been as bullish. And I think they're way more bullish based on the way he finished the season.
Maybe, but we know they liked him when the Jets were shopping him too, right?
True, but I'm saying then it got pretty ugly for a year, right?
Yeah.
In 2021. Yeah. It's easier to be more excited because when everyone was interested in him, when the Panthers traded for him, it was just the Jets disaster joke. Pretend that shit didn't happen. Then he goes to the Panthers. Again, I think you'd kind of judge 21, Matt Rule, not an NFL coach. Maybe that actually aged better. But at the time, he gets beat out by Baker Mayfield. His career had just kind of been derailed, right? In terms of people just viewing the guy as a good quarterback. How could you? And then I do think the last stretch of the season this year just brought respectability and the promise back. More back to where you could look at him like the guy that people are interested in trading for a second-round pick. Because right now, Trey Lance, I know Grant Cohn's talking about this. Why are they just going to trade him? They couldn't get a second-round pick for Trey Lance today. They could not do it. Think about that. Not possible. Honestly, I don't think you get a third. I mean, today. Now, that can change.
But you couldn't get that for Sam Darnold either.
No, I know, but Sam Darnold, after year 3, right, was worth a second and a fourth.
Right, but again, I think there's a real possibility that Sam could beat Trey Lance out. I mean, and the news today is that Kyle Shanahan is basically saying he's going to get that chance. But I also think it's more likely than not that Sam Darnold's, we've kind of seen it, right? The odds are just on the way quarterback play generally goes. We've kind of seen that he's probably not a top 20, top 15 NFL starter. Now, maybe he is. We haven't seen Kyle Shanahan in this position before, taking somebody else's highly drafted guy, getting him on his team. We've seen Kyle take low drafted guys and turn them into somebody else's exciting backup, kinda, right? But we haven't seen Kyle try to do this one yet. So maybe Sam will be lucky to kind of be the first one to get the Kyle Shanahan career surgery. But the history tells us the odds are that's not how this is going to go. Now, maybe he'll defy the odds. Brock Purdy defied the odds. Maybe he'll defy the odds. But if Kyle's so great at it, he should be able to do it. He should at least be able to make Trey Lance better than we've seen to this point, too.
I would say this: if Kyle's a legit coach, which I think
that's right.
is,
He did try it with Josh Rosen, kind of, but
Josh stinks.
Not like this.
I don't think those two are comparable. I would say look at the history of good offensive coaches when they've got a rehabilitation project. Andy Reid, Jim Harbaugh, like it gets done a lot throughout the NFL, and I do think this is an opportunity. Like I'm betting on Sam Darnold to be better than Trey Lance. And I'm not trying to be some Trey Lance hater. I was very excited when he was drafted. I changed my opinion as information. I gather information.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be negative Nancy on the guy. He seems like an easy person to root. Like I'm not rooting for Zach Wilson. I'm rooting for Trey Lance. I just tend to think he's not very good. Now, you could have said the same. A lot of people hammered that home about Sam Darnold. The difference is I think Sam was a little different, just kind of fucking animal coming out of college. Yeah, guy went to USC. I mean, it's just a different level, right? And was clearly more ready to play immediately. It's hard to compare to because his situations were so shitty. I mean, the guy played for a coach that's never going to be an NFL coach ever again, right? Ever. Honestly, both of them, right? Adam Gase and then Matt Rule.
Matt Rule.
They're just not. So it's just like Trey did get to go to, as you put out the other day, the greatest situation a top 5 quarterback has ever seen in the history of the league.
Well, I said the most. Yeah, however you want to say it. The best team.
The only comparable really is like Mahomes and Roethlisberger, and those guys are both. Mahomes is already Hall of Famer, and Roethlisberger's a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yeah,
like it's just they got to inherit awesome, and they were awesome.
Right.
So it's just.
I mean, you really could argue. We've said, it's such a tough spot for a quarterback in his spot, but it's not a tough spot if you have just a baseline of ability to play NFL games and are healthy.
No.
Right.
Not at all.
If you need development, then maybe it's a tough spot. And I think what also makes a tough spot is when there's another option. Like when the veterans on the team go, we have another option here, and we like this other option better. Right? If there were no other option, Trey Lance healthy might just be a 3-year starter for the 49ers.
Here's what I find funny. And again, this is internet-based. I don't know if normal human beings have these conversations, but I think you see it on Twitter. We see it in the YouTube comments when people talk about why are you people being loyal to Sam Darnold? And my response is, how the fuck could you be loyal to Trey Lance? How could you possibly sit there and feel good about having that lot in land, having that asset? How do you feel? How could you go to war for that? And I feel like on the interweb, there are a lot of people, because it just goes back to the team traded and there's hope. To me, there's no more hope. Because I base everything off what I see. It wasn't pretty, and you and I get even more access because we've been to these practices we saw the Rocky last year. And then there's just an injury aspect, which is unfortunate. And then 2, I watch a coach now that's been to 3 NFC Championship games and a Super Bowl, a general manager who is a Hall of Famer, defensive player who's seen all the great quarterbacks of basically your and I lifetime, right? From the young Favre group to then the Manning Brady group. He's seen them all, played against them. And they're both just, they pivoted immediately to Purdy, and they're both just saying yeah, it's competition now. That's their take. And they get paid to run the team. So if I just base it on my own information, just watching it and just following the league and just kind of being able to make educated opinions on stuff, how could you go Lynch and Kyle, fuck, clearly, what do these idiots know? It's what are we talking about? I can't, to me, there's nothing weirder right now than the Trey Lance truthers. And that's different than I'm rooting for the guy, but you got to roll with them. You got to go down with Trey Lance. And I feel on the interweb, there is a subset of those guys. Now, they get louder, obviously.
Yeah. I would separate them from, I think it's a legitimate take to say he started 4 games. Sam Darnold started 50.
5.
There's a big difference. And Trey was going to start more. Now, the question is, here's what we don't know. Was Trey going to start 4 games healthy last year and get replaced by Jimmy? Right? Because that conversation had already started.
Yeah, their greatest argument is the unknown.
Yeah, 100%. But it's not just an argument for Trey. It's an argument against Sam. I think it's fair to also be pessimistic. Guys, We've had 55 games. All right. 55. Like that's not nothing here. And I'm pro letting them battle it out. And I am pro the possibility that Sam's going to take the job and be the backup quarterback of the 49ers and start week 1 if Brock's not available. I think all that stuff's real. But I also think it's fair to say there are reasons you drafted the guy. Part of your job is to find a way to develop it. And that there is a greater possibility that exists than that Sam Darnold's a starting quarterback for the next 15 years. Like, I also think this. I think it's more possible than not that none of these guys are their starting quarterback in 5 years, including Brock.
Could be a very sound bet.
I am pro Brock Purdy, but 8 games is not a career.
No.
There is a long way to go here with all 3 of them.
I do think if we look back, which we've been saying this, there's no way around this. If the guy that you traded all this for, and we talked about this yesterday, is now competing to be a backup by year 3, given what you traded for him, you would like a redo on that.
Yes, I agree.
I do think if we just look at the individual move, I think it's fair to say that the emotional, roller coaster of the 2020 season, they probably made a decision emotionally that maybe they weren't thinking clearly, right? You're always taught, like, in life, right? People in business tell you, like, when you make big business decisions, try to sleep on it, take a deep breath. They were very emotional in that decision to try to, like, pivot from Jimmy, to get aggressive with Stafford. They kind of tried to play the Rams game, and they missed because the Rams kind of had it rigged because of the deal that they could do with Jared Goff, which actually the Lions were smart, right? I mean, Jared Goff has been a solid just kind of, fixture for them.
And they have the 6th pick in the draft this year.
Yeah, that's a fucking phenomenal trade. I mean, everyone's, blowing Seattle's trade. You could argue they got their starting quarterback and the pick. But I just think emotions were running high. And since then, it feels like they've been much more stable with a lot of their decision-making. And when they're stable with their decision-making, like they've been pretty good. And in fairness to the Trey draft, like, it was just a weird draft, right? It was just a weird situation given. I give the Jets a little bit of a pass, too. That year with Zach Wilson was weird. Typically, you watch BYU's schedule. They play Notre Dame. They play USC. They play real team. That year, they were playing Haberman, MIDDLEKAUFF, and, fucking Cal Poly. It was, you look at that season. Now, he was awesome, but that was a weird season. Would he have looked like that in their normal schedule? And they played the best team that they played. They got beat. But even that, like, on a typical season for BYU, a lot of respect for BYU. Mm-hmm. Coastal's like 6th or 7th best opponent on a typical schedule. I mean, they play Notre Dame. They play real teams all the time.
True road game. That might have been scheduled late, too, if I remember. But Coastal,
they had to because the Pac-12 wouldn't play out of conference teams. Either with the Big Ten.
Living daylights out of. Remember somebody like hit him super late at the end of the first half? Zach Wilson. They were trying to kill him that day. Coastal, John.
Yeah. And they did. I mean, they beat him
the
up.
Bad boys at Coastal Carolina.
But here's my thing. Yeah. And I'm a little biased because I like Sam Darnold. I just knew way more about him, watched him. I liked him a lot coming out of college. And I think some of this is, and again, I've spent a couple years around Andy Reid. They see things in guys that, like, there's an arrogance to a great coach. Like, they never say this because coaches love talking about other good coaches, other coaches like they're all good, even though they know they're not. Alex Smith is a great example. Through those 4 or 5, he was a joke, a laughingstock. Do you know what, as it aged, what turned out? Mike Nolan and Mike Singletary are 2 of the biggest laughingstocks in NFL history. Like, let's face it, Adam Gase is a pretty big joke. Like, that's not going to change. Matt Rule isn't necessarily a joke, right? He's probably going to go to Nebraska, have success. He's a very successful college coach. But I would say NFL-wise, like, probably had no business, I mean, just not an NFL guy. So I'm betting on my belief in Kyle. Like, I know how, and I just think, what an incredible landing spot. It just doesn't get any better. Things that, like, people that say about Trey. But we've seen Trey, like, it's kind of a struggle for him. And the other thing is, it's not like these guys have told me personally, but it's pretty clear, like, I don't know if the stud players on this team are super bought in. I think they like the guy personally, nice guy, but I don't know if they believe in his talent. And one thing we saw at Super Bowl, they clearly got some takes. They
Well,
don't always tell him.
Here's the thing, John. Like, splitting reps with Sam Darnold's great. It's great because if you're the starter week 1, let's say if you're Trey or you're the backup quarterback, you will have to earn it. Sam will also be likable in the locker room. Sam will also have leadership qualities. Sam will have just the basic entry-level things that the 49ers look for in players. So I do think, like Kyle Shanahan has established now on March 28th, if Trey Lance is the starting quarterback or the backup quarterback to Brock Purdy, he will have had to earn it this time. It will be harder to question why he's the quarterback than last time, right?
It'd be impressive. I will be very impressed if he can beat out Sam Darnold, assuming Brock Purdy is not ready to go, like John Lynch said, by training camp. So, I also think it kind of shows you what they told Samuel Darnold, right, when they signed him. They didn't say, you're just coming in as the kids would say, QB3.
Yeah.
He and his representation were told, we have no clue with our guy with a brace on.
Right.
Come in here, compete. You can be the starter come week 1 with
chance to compete.
Looking at Ayuk, Debo, Kittle, and Christian McCaffrey and Elijah Mitchell. That would be just for that game. He'll be gone by week 2. But Trent will be there and some other folks.
Historically, back of the QB room is a good place to be on the 49ers. Yeah. You get to the front of the room pretty quickly, right? Even if he was in the back of the quarterback room. We've seen it, but he's not in the back of the room.
No. He's sitting right next to their shoulder to shoulder.
Shoulder to shoulder, yeah. Like Andy Reid and Bill Belichick. No Vrabel, Sirianni, Frank Reich.
I wonder where those guys were.
I don't know. Let's get to the Brock Purdy part of this conversation, John, as we continue here on the Haberman and Middlecoff live stream. Up next, well, your face is bigger. That's not what I was trying to do. This, Matt Burrows, John Lynch, and Kyle Shanahan in a nutshell. Lynch, we hope Brock Purdy is back for training camp. Shanahan, it could be week 4. Kyle Shanahan said, we'll see in 3 months if he's ready for camp or not. It'll be a 4-month or 6-month recovery. Actually, he said 6 or 8 months. 6 or 8 months. There's a couple of different quotes out there, but 6 or 8 months. He could either be ready for camp. He could be ready for week 1. He could be ready for week 4 at the latest, is the way Shanahan said it. So could go anywhere from 6 to 8 months. 3 months after surgery is when they kind of get an idea of how he's doing.
Well, put it this way. Week 4 is usually right around October. That means it's 10/1/23. We're still in the month of 3. That's a long way away.
Yeah.
Now, I do think John and his little sit down yesterday, Kyle gives me a lot of crap. I'm Mr. Optimistic. I think essentially what he's saying, he's Mr. Pessimistic, and that's kind of the ebb and flow of this. I also think it's easier in John's seat to be optimistic about things, and Kyle, who's, kind of in the trenches with the boys, to be able to
he has to prepare for the worst scenario, right?
Yeah. So it's clear they don't know. Purdy doesn't know. I think they said he was going to come over and see him last night. He just lives down the road in Gilbert. He has an enormous brace on, which clearly, I would imagine you probably put a little bag over that thing when you shower. That it's. I was reading about you do it so it it makes sense, right? It's why when guys get their shoulders messed up, they have that thing. When you have your elbow, because you can't have it flopping around and re-rip. But to me, it's one thing if the thing holds. And then what it's like when you start throwing. I think the amount of unknowns, it's a very uncomfortable spot. It's more uncomfortable for Kyle, I think, than John in a weird way because you just have no clue. Honestly, he could be completely fine by, mid-August, be ripping it. There could be a chance he constantly has swelling and stuff, and it's just we're looking at a guy that, I think you could honestly say worst case, it's just he misses the season. It doesn't necessarily affect his career, but it was just a longer road to recovery, right? I think that's on the table right now.
Yeah, I mean that would be it could have. If you told me that happens, I would say then there's a likelihood that it does affect his career. You told me he's out for the year with a 6-month injury. I would say, is his arm the same when he comes back?
But if 6 turns into 8, all of a sudden you're in November. What if a guy's starting?
No, I get it. I would not be if you told me that it is the worst case recovery scenario, I would not be optimistic that he comes back the same player. So that's just my take on that. They've had a ton in their short, maybe not so short tenure of complicated injuries. Some of them more back surgeries are complicated. Jalen Hurd. Knee surgeries, tougher maybe with a big person, Javon Kinlaw. But they have had
injured guys before they acquired, though.
Injured guys before. The D Ford thing. But they've had a long list of don't put all your eggs in one basket, guys. And unfortunately for them, the guy who is their clear-cut starting quarterback is the guy in that position now. And who knows? I don't, Kyle said, exactly what John Lynch said, exactly what everybody knows. If he'd never gotten hurt, he'd be the starting quarterback still. You remember watching UCLA the other day? What'd they shoot in the first half against Gonzaga? Like 52% or something?
Yeah.
Then the game hits halftime, and they are a completely different team in the second half. They go 11 and a half minutes without making a basket. They shoot, I don't even remember what they shot, 28% or some crap. It was awful. And I do wonder if Brock, if you have the year he had, everything's going smoothly, you hit the offseason feeling like $1 million. It's your team from the jump. You're throwing with Ayuk. You're throwing with Debo. You're throwing with Jennings. You're throwing with Kittle. You're throwing with Juice. You are just the man. You're talking to Kyle 3 times a week. You're tweeting out. You're texting out videos to guys. You're getting in there with John Beck. You're talking to Tom House. You're getting a little stronger. 5 yards on his deep ball, his arms. And instead of all of that momentum, it just came to a screeching halt. And he's got to build all of that back up. And I hope it doesn't have the effect of halftime on a hot shooting basketball team, because I don't think it'd be realistic to expect him, even if healthy, to come back and just be whatever he was, on pace for 30 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. I think we all acknowledge that. But I hope he hasn't lost some of the stuff that got him rolling in the way that he did last year.
Well, I think it'd be asking a lot. Let's just say it goes well, and he's not really cleared till toward the end of camp. Isn't it a little crazy to just start week 1 with like a non-established player to he just starts week 1 and starts playing?
You're saying he's cleared week 1, now he starts practicing and just starts that game.
Yeah, week 1's whatever, September 10th. He just is able to start practicing with the boys September 1st. We're not talking fucking Mahomes here or Rodgers. This guy, he's played 8 games in his career. So I would say there's no guarantee, and this is what I think Kyle's saying, that are they just going to shove him back out there? Feels like a little less likely, and that to me goes back to why before we even knew Sam Darnold was the guy, the group of players we were talking about was going to be someone that they could patchwork if Trey wasn't good enough to start games. Right? They were going to be in the Andy Dalton, Sam Darnold, like that group of player that they could play games with if Trey wasn't ready, because this is not top 10 established quarterback where you just if Pat Mahomes missed all of training camp and he showed up on Thursday before week 1, like he's starting, right? I don't know if Brock's quite on that level, even for his own health.
Well,
right?
Do you think part of it has to do with how those guys look? Whoever is the 49ers' other quarterback, Trey or Sam, how good that player looks, and who you play week 1? I wonder if we know who they are going to play. We don't know the order they're going to play them in.
I don't think that I remember thinking that last year. I don't think it matters, because remember the Bears drafted number 1, the fucking 49ers lost. I just don't think quarterbacks coaches think like that at all. We think more about stuff like that than they do. He'll view whether they're playing the Bears or whether they're playing the Eagles as a legit foe. And I think it's easy for Kyle. We've lost these weird games. You can lose any game in the NFL.
Yeah.
I think we talk about that a lot, and rightfully so, because it's an interesting topic. I don't think they think like that, though.
Because coaches think, I can lose today. And I better not lose today.
Remember, the Bears, easy transition. And then it's 19-10. Is this the worst loss of the season?
In a monsoon?
It was a bad loss no matter what, though.
Yeah, it was a bad loss. Well, I know, but would they lose that game if not for a monsoon? Maybe. They might have.
But I would say the last couple of years,
Dante Pettis just got wide open.
well, they've won some crazy games, big games. They've lost some Falcons, Bears. I think Kyle's lost
Last
enough
year's
weird
Broncos
games.
game was not in a monsoon.
I don't think it will have any bearing on, whether, like, oh, they're playing. This defense was the number 2 defense last year, because he'll just be like, well, every year's new. They might suck. They might be good. Who knows? You just have no clue.
So Brock Purdy gets cleared. I wonder if they would play him in a preseason game if he got cleared really close to the season.
Yeah, I don't. I would say that, Rodgers practicing with the Jets probably will be the biggest storyline of the NFL training camp. I do think Brock Purdy's situation, the Niners quarterback, like just how it's kind of coming to fruition with Sam, Trey, and then like Brock's health is going to be, we're going to talk about it nonstop, but I would say it's going to be one of the bigger stories in the NFL, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah, it's been one of the biggest stories of the 2 days of the league meetings. Part of it is the third guy is famous too.
Yeah.
Darnold. It's not Sudfeld or something.
It is. I didn't even think about that. This is the first, like they've done, rehabilitation projects at other positions, obviously. They've signed free agents at other positions that have worked, that haven't worked. This is the first kind of like former guy, failed, still pretty young.
Still young. Yeah, that's part of it. Who still should be at his physical peak.
This is the type of shit you get a lot of credit. This is when, part of the reason Andy Reid got a lot of credit, and really became one of the main coaches in the 2000s. He didn't win a Super Bowl. He was doing a lot of like Donovan McNabb sneaky got hurt more than you think. And there were a lot of wins with guys like old Jeff Garcia, young Feely, like just some random. Yeah, and Kyle's had some of that, right? That's what.
Did he win any games with Kevin Cobb?
Yeah, a couple.
Didn't Kevin Cobb go like 6-1 or something? Didn't he get off to a hot start?
I think he played a decent amount the year before I got there, but when he got there, he got KO'd in the first game. Michael Vick came on and boom, almost won the MVP. 2 years previously, he was in Leavenworth. Like that, you do stuff like that with, at the time, Michael had been written off, rightfully so. Been in trouble, but also like, this guy's still going to be able to play in the NFL? Right?
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, that's the type of stuff with offensive coaches. And what did he get to inherit? Shady McCoy, Jeremy Maclin, Brent Selleck, Deshaun Jackson, Jason Peters. Like, it was it wasn't like Haberman MIDDLEKAUFF out there on the outside. It's kind of like this. I'm not saying that Sam Darnold's like comeback player of the year, going to be the Niners full-time starter, but this type of stuff does happen.
It's a real story.
Yeah.
Sam, and it's a real story because of what you just said, Sam's age, and because of how bad the teams and situations he played for are.
And the unknown of like, if I was a betting man right now, I would probably bet against just, there's a pretty serious injury. You're also taking it like you're not winning the Super Bowl in week 1. As we know, the Niners lose that game sometimes. Like I would say Brock Purdy's not there week 1 out of precaution / I just don't see him ripping it all over the place like August 15th. Do you?
No, I think that'd be more hopeful. I would call that hopeful, not even optimistic. I'd call it hopeful. Now, I think the reality usually is somewhere in between the extremes. And, the reality is the most likely scenario is probably that he's not back at the very beginning, but he's also back, 3 weeks before week 1. That's probably the most realistic scenario.
Yeah.
Right?
I was always,
who do you put in with your backup tackles in the third quarter of a preseason game if all of your quarterbacks could be your starter? You need a fourth guy to just take a beating.
Yeah, I think Trey Lance is going to play a lot. How's he not going to play a lot in preseason? Because I would say this, like, the practice is very important for Sam, but, like, do preseason games matter? Like, I do think these reps
new
for
team,
Trey Lance,
new offense, new teammates.
Like, to me, Trey Lance is getting, like, halves. First halves. It's not like Trent's playing anyway. So Kittle ain't dressing. So, to me, Trey's playing a lot in preseason. And that's not because, like, I'm trying to screw him. He just needs some
needs
playing time.
Yeah.
Holy cannoli, as Clay would say.
That's legit. By the way, John, thanks to TJ who gave us 10 pounds. Love the pod. Keep up the great content. I did the whatever you call it, $12 American.
Ooh, thank you, TJ.
Yeah.
Appreciate you. Who knows? Maybe the pound will be the a lot of rumors on the interweb about the America's being the lead currency coming to a screeching halt. So maybe we'll just transition to the pound.
What are our candidates? The pound, the lira,
Yeah, I think the won.
the yuan for sure.
You know, who knows?
Toronto?
You just never know.
Yeah.
It had a good run.
What
you
else
just,
we
you
got
have to
today?
go outside to know the dollar's never meant less. I'll tell you that much.
I saw a great tweet from somebody. They said all the kickers should get the number 0. I thought that was a good idea.
What was the story?
That you can wear the number 0 now. That was
Gotcha.
the story. And the idea was, well, it should go to all the kickers. I thought that was a good idea.
I thought Dion put it pretty eloquently, a couple weeks ago. It is different in the pros, but like some of these guys wanting these sweet numbers. Like, let's pump the brakes, fellas. Can none of you guys, what are we doing? Like, you just don't get to wear like 5 or 2 and look really sweet. Let's just see if you can play a little first. So, because part of it, right? No one in Colorado wore numbers in the spring.
Oh, is that right?
You haven't seen that story?
No.
Yeah.
What's their spring game coming up in? I think 3 weeks maybe.
Yeah, no one's been wearing numbers.
Good for Dion.
He was just saying, it's back in my day, you had to earn like.
Yeah,
wearing
you're
cool
certainly
numbers.
not going to just let anybody have 21, right?
Yeah.
Backup receiver running out there in 21, not going to be acceptable.
No.
I wonder if 21 will be the most desired number.
Well, he wore 2 in college. I think he was specifically talking about the single digits.
Gotcha, because that's what everyone chases.
Yeah. I do think someone said that his son automatically got 2, but they were well.
Can we say something real quick, like 30 seconds, just because I get distracted kind of by the comments, even though we don't like to. People have been asking the last few days why we've done some streams that are broken up, and the answer is just because we're trying stuff. Someone was like, "Oh, it's because it makes more money that way." It's been 2 days of trying some different things. There's no evidence that it makes more money that way. I know some people don't like it. In some ways, it creates more views, which is ultimately what we're after on YouTube. The podcast is a separate thing that some of the stuff gets repurposed for, but there's no conclusion there. It's just some stuff we've tried. We might keep trying it. We'll see. We're messing around.
I'd argue, as you, the consumer, it does not matter at all. Like, it's as someone that consumes a lot of YouTube,
want to just watch a full show live on YouTube. Those are the people that we've, I think, heard from the complaints from. But the majority of people watch it not live.
Yeah, you are the heavy minority of someone watching it right now, which I thank you.
Which we appreciate.
Yeah.
Easier for editing, easier for the video editing, less easier for the audio editing. But that we wouldn't do it for that reason necessarily. We're just trying to find the thing that benefits the show the most and creates the most traction and growth. Would be the idea. I saw somebody say, well, maybe I noticed the Tito's logo is gone. Maybe they're not getting the Tito's money, so they can't pay for an editor. The Tito's logo is gone. Tito's will.
No, they're back. Yeah.
I don't know. Can we say it? It's signed, sealed, delivered.
Yeah.
Tito's will be back for the football season. I think August 1 is when Tito's returns again.
Yeah, they've bought 3 straight 6 months. I mean, they buy the football season.
Yeah, so they'll be back for a 3rd straight football season. But we ain't giving it away for free.
No.
So that's the situation there. But yeah, we'll keep messing around. We appreciate your feedback. It's fine. I get why.
Do we though?
Huh?
I don't.
Appreciate the feedback.
Not that I don't care about the feedback. It's more just
sometimes people have good ideas that I haven't thought of or that we haven't thought of.
For sure. I just don't ultimately either way. I mean, it's just.
We're not making any decisions based on 7 comments, though. We promise you that.
Yeah. This isn't a television show. These are fucking YouTube videos. What are you guys talking about?
We appreciate you, though.
Yeah, we do. A lot.
What I like is when I see somebody say, I fucking hate this, but then they're around making other comments. Like, that makes me happy. Like, you're allowed to pop off.
That's what we learned in radio, like the callers don't represent the group.
We did learn that very early. I'll give JB credit on that one very early in radio. His lesson was just because you get 7 calls doesn't mean it's a good topic. And it's true.
Or else you would have built your whole business around the Raiders and the A's.
Yeah. I don't know if the A's generated as many callers, John, as someone who did A's postgame live as Raiders postgame live.
The Raiders did generate a lot of calls.
All right. On that note, thanks for hanging. Thanks for your feedback. And keep yelling at us. We appreciate it. We appreciate that you care. Because we care. Bye.